So today, Annie and I are going to show you 4 programs that we have that were successful on limited resources before COVID. We're going to tell you how we have adapted them for our current environment, and then dropping some plans in regards to how we're planning to maintain them after COVID, post-COVID. We will have some general tricks and general tips for you so that you can take some of the things that we're talking about and apply them to your own facilities. We really want to make it realistic and logistical for you. And I do want to encourage you, you're welcome to take screenshots of our slides. I mean, usually when we're at a face-to-face conference, people always stand up with their cell phone to snap a photo of a slide that they really like. If you see anything like that, you're welcome to take a screenshot. So we are actually going to start today just to see where you guys are at. We're going to use Poll Everywhere. And if you want to text Lauren Hunley 714 to the number, or you can use a web browser on your cell phone, or if you want to open another window on your desktop to the email, to the address there, and then just type in your answer. What is your biggest hurdle or challenge to affordable programming? So Annie, if you want to come out of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so and then I am going to share our responses. And let's see. So you guys are welcome to pull out your phones, tablets, open a different window. You'll see how to respond at the top of the screen. And just tell us, what's your biggest hurdle? Just making sure. Okay. Finding the time, yes. We're all wearing a lot of different hats, aren't we? Lack of funds, absolutely. Sometimes it's hard for the administration to know that programming is important, educational programming.
Expectations for audience sizes, been there.
Oh, girl, preach.
Pulled from the recycle bin. There's a classy way to pull it from the recycle bin, though. We'll talk about a couple of those, I bet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Minimal staff, that can be a challenge too. We're actually going to touch on a couple options for that. Finding the time. Absolutely, yes. I can relate to each and every one of these responses. I just want you guys to know this is real. I get it.
Needing to clone myself. Good news, we'll be announcing some new technology available after this presentation.
Well, actually, my question is, if you clone yourself, so which one's the evil twin? Like, do you get to choose that before cloning is complete?
Not everything translating exactly to virtual, for sure.
Listen, we're at one of the programs we talk about today is a program that is continuing a healthy life in our current environment, and it is not digital. So we understand that too. Digital isn't always an option. All right, so just going to see any more responses. I think we've really hit what most of us are struggling with. Lack of funds, time. Who has enough time to do it all? In addition to being a social media manager and a marketing manager and a curator and everything else. So we are gonna highlight 4 programs between Annie and I and our institutions. And then, like I said, we're gonna have a time to share some ways for you to apply some of the things for yourself. And then we're gonna open the floor. So Annie, I am actually gonna stop my screen and turn it back over to you.
Get mine back up here. All right. Well, thank you everyone for having me today. This is my first MPMA conference. I'm happy to be here. So I wanted to start just by talking a little bit about our museum, just to give you a little bit of background, and then I'll talk about a couple of our programs So the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum has been around in some iteration for a long time, since 1984, but we actually opened a brand new space last September, so September of 19. It's our first time we have a purpose-built building, a brand new exhibit, new content, which made it all the more painful when we had to temporarily close just about 6 months later, but we've been pivoting. So we, in our current museum, cover a few main topics. So the history of the Holocaust, of course, but we also talk about other human rights issues. So we talk about representational justice, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 10 stages of genocide, as well as human and civil rights in the United States. So a lot of the programming we do really comes from that core content. We also focus programming on our current special exhibit and some other special topics. So again, pretty familiar story for all of you. We had to temporarily close the museum on March 14th due to COVID. We did reopen in mid-August. So we are back open, but of course, keeping all of our programming virtual for the time being, just for everyone's safety. So the first program I wanted to talk about is our I Read Book Club. These are a couple pictures from our February book club, just about a month before we closed, where we talked about the Nazi officer's wife. So pre-COVID, this was an in-person book club. We held it about 5 times a year, gathering folks in our classroom at the museum to have a discussion about a book generally related to the Holocaust. We tried to focus on kind of non-academic, more accessible books, some of the more popular historical fiction, that kind of thing. This program was really run by our Director of Education, Dr. Charlotte DeCoster, who would pick the books with a little bit of input from some of our team and lead the discussions. Although really the goal was to have a participant-led discussion, really focus on the points that our participants wanted to talk about. So really this program was fairly low or no cost to begin with. Other than the staff time it took for our Director of Education to do a little bit of prep, and then the conversation, of course, we encourage participants to bring their own lunch. We have it in our own space, so we're not charging or paying a rental fee, anything like that. So this was something that, again, was really low cost to begin with. Post-COVID, looking a little bit different. So we, again, quickly pivoted to virtual programming as much as we could after we closed. This actually was a program that in a lot of ways was fairly easy to translate to virtual. It is a little more awkward to have kind of a discussion-based program on Zoom, but the mechanics were there. So the biggest part, this is a screenshot from our Defiance Book Club in April, was really getting people used to this new format. So you can see kind of our guidelines slide here that Charlotte's going over, how to mute, unmute, turn your video off and on, what to do if you have a bad connection, all sorts of rules we didn't even think about having before. But this is what it looked like. So this, you know, again, it's a great program to have in person. It wasn't strictly necessary though. So this was a great translation for us. A couple of actually positive side effects to having to go virtual. We were able to increase the frequency. So, you know, once a month or once every couple months was about all that people wanted in terms of coming to the museum, but we had higher demand as people could join from home over their lunch hour if they were working from home. So basically, if we had the staff capacity, we could increase the frequency. So we actually did this weekly for a little bit. That proved to be a little too much, so we've kind of found a happy medium since then. And it was easier access for people who want to come. I'm sure you all, if you're doing virtual programming, you've experienced that. Folks who don't even live in Dallas or Texas, we've had some out-of-state people attend, even people who live in Dallas but just don't want to drive downtown. We have some people who are just not interested in that. So we've actually seen attendance increase after we moved virtual. One thing we did do to help kind of lighten the load a little bit, again, for Charlotte, especially our Director of Education, was to involve other staff members in the book club. So not everyone will have this, but we had a couple of other education staff members who were available to help out, either moderating a session on their own or as a co-moderator, which again, lightens that burden a little bit. If it takes a while for the conversation to get going because it's virtual, it feels a little weird. That way they have someone to kind of bounce off of and do a little back and forth to really get people warmed up. So that's been really fun. We have a couple of people in our education department who don't normally do this kind of programming, but they have certain experience or they loved a certain book and just wanted to get involved. So that's been cool to see. Another kind of unintended positive consequence is that we were able to involve a couple of authors as well in these conversations. So as you all know, bringing someone in from out of town, out of state, comes with this whole set of challenges and costs. But we were able, once we went virtual, to invite or to welcome a couple of authors into the book discussion group. So on the left, you see Martha Hall Kelly, who is the author of Lilac Girls, and on the right is Jane Yolen, who's the author of Devil's Arithmetic. This is actually a family-friendly book club that we did. And we found these folks in two very different ways. So Martha, we had invited to the museum a couple of years before. We had a partnership with an organization, and we brought her in for an author event, a public in-person program. So we had that connection with her, and she was happy to come and just chat Lilac Girls with us a little bit. Jane Yolen was a very different story. She actually called us out of the blue. Not all the way sure how she found us, maybe a Google alert on her name or something, but left a message on one of my colleagues' voicemails and said, "This is Jane Yolen, I heard about this, can I come?" My colleague actually thought it was a prank. She sent an email out to the entire education staff and said, "Who's doing this?" But it was really Jane Yolen, so we were excited to have her. So it was great to have both of them come. We did sort of a Q&A format, again, moderated by one of our educators, and it was awesome. I mean, people were excited to come and to see it. And then we realized that there's a kind of a mutually beneficial option here. So one thing that we've been thinking about is looking for authors who maybe have a new book coming out. Maybe they're currently promoting something. They can't do their in-person tours like they normally would. So this might be something that they would actually be excited to do in order to promote sales, promote their work, etc. So for the author, it's great because they don't have the hassle of having to plan their schedule around travel, losing a couple of days to get there and get back. We don't incur the costs of course, flight, hotel, mileage, whatever that looks like, but we get to have this great discussion with an author kind of up close and personal. So that was a happy coincidence that we discovered after we went virtual for this one. So that was I Read, and I'll turn it back over to Lauren for the next program.
Thank you. I do want to just because I love the I Read program and point out that a lot of these programs are family friendly or even teen targeted, so they don't have to be just adult.
Absolutely, yeah. We pick, we've sort of been alternating back and forth between definitely an adult book, but also more teen friendly, maybe books that students have read in their high school classes or are going to read. One thing we actually did over the summer, we had a virtual summer camp. And so for the older group of kids, we actually made that part of the summer camp curriculum as well. So that gave us a built-in audience, and it just gave them some added value. Yeah, so for sure, you can kind of age it up or age it down however you need to.
I apologize, there's a train right outside my window. But I'm just gonna move forward in the reality that we have. So the Western Heritage Center in Billings, Montana has been around since 1971. Such is the reality of my existence with my train. We are technically an interpretive center, which means that our exhibits change about every 3 to 4 months. We do not have a permanent exhibit ever in our space. One of the places that we actually have what we call the community gallery. It is a community-driven exhibit program. Now, I want to make the point that an exhibit is not a program. These are two different, they operate differently, they're planned differently. However, we have a community-driven program for our community exhibit space. What this means is people can make requests. Artists can come to us about possibly displaying their art. We can see spring of last year, we had a show by Judd Thompson called Walking the Good Path. You can see just from the glimpses that you have, it's a little bit different contemporary take on, of course, Montana culture. But we also use this space to invite individual community members to display their own work. Last winter, we had what we called the Billings Thrift Art Show. It was thrift art that people had found in thrift stores and consignment shops around the region. Staff submitted art, community members submitted art, people could suggest art. We had a little bit of everything. You can see in the photograph there, some of it was really good and some of it was really not good. And we took the opportunity to explore concepts of art. Who gets to decide whether art is art? Who gets to decide what type of art should be in a museum and what type of art shouldn't? People had the opportunity to vote for their favorite pieces. They could suggest titles for thrift art pieces. And then we took a space and converted it into an artist studio so people could create their own art and display it on the walls in that studio space. When the museum shut down, we realized that, I should back up just a minute and tell you, because it's a community-driven exhibit program, the budget and staff time tend to be pretty low. The Billings thrift art exhibit we did for less than $200, all told completely. There's about 35 hours of staff work associated with these exhibits. When we had to shut down because of the quarantine, we realized that people still want to share their work with their community. So Annie, could you advance for me, please? So we decided to do an online exhibit. Now, this was something a lot of museums were talking about, a lot of museums were thinking about, exploring options to do online exhibits. However, ours was a little different because it was completely community driven. We put out a call for Montana artists of all ages, of all artistic styles. So you can see in the one photograph, people could actually vote and heart their favorite pieces. They could also leave comments. We chose to use a platform called Padlet. Padlet has a free subscription. They also have a paid subscription option that allows people to interact with the pieces. So not only did we have a programmatic component of working with community artists, finding their pieces, having them submit them, and if you can advance, you'll actually see that each artist wrote their own description. We had 145 artists submit 167 different pieces, individual artistic pieces, photographs, paintings, textiles, sculptures, poetry. We had a musician who wrote an original musical score, and he submitted it as an audio file, and we were able to display it as a community exhibit program online, and people loved it. And really, it was because we did all the work ourselves, and because it was all embedded into our website. The only cost we had was the nominal subscription to Padlet to be able to host multiple pages. It was actually really inexpensive for us. And it also pulled artists who didn't even know we existed. They thought we were just a history site. They didn't know that we did art too. So we've actually seen a little bit of increase in membership because it reached, this opportunity reached new audiences. So Annie, I'm gonna let you hit your last program and then we'll do mine.
Sorry, Zoom is being testy with me today. Thank you, Lauren. So the last program I'll talk about is our Movie Monday program. So this is an example of actually a brand new program that we've created sort of in reaction to the shutdown, but really it's something that's been successful and we want to continue it. So this was a little bit of a spin-off from an existing in-person program that we had. And it's an example of going from an in-person program with a definite hard cost attached to a virtual program that really is, I'm going to say low cost, and I'll explain why, but almost no cost. So prior to closing the museum in March, we had a film series that we were doing. So at least once a month, we would have a film screening in our space, ranging anywhere, you know, Holocaust and human rights movies, obviously, but with the occasional series as well. So in February, for instance, we had a Black History Month film series every Sunday. In March, as you see here, we had a Women's History Month series that we were doing that unfortunately we only got to the first 2 films before we had to close. But this was it was a screening only. So folks would come in, it was a free screening to the public. They would watch the film and that was that. So there was no discussion element, things like that. We would have a short introduction, but that was about it. And of course, the hard cost we incurred in this situation was the film license. So very much depends on the film and the audience, if you're charging or not, but for us, usually the cost is about $300 to $500 per film for the license. So after we went virtual, we had to think about how to switch this to something else. And I'm just showing you our Cinemark Theater here as an example. A little bit of that sort of pang we had when we had to kind of stop using this beautiful new space that we had built and go virtual, but that's okay, we'll be back there sometime. So our solution was this Movie Monday series. So again, every third Monday evening, we have this virtual discussion. Rather than hosting that screening, what we do is we pick films that people can find and watch on their own. We try to pick films that are pretty readily available, either through a Netflix subscription, Hulu, Amazon Video, something like that. It does sometimes have a small rental cost associated, but fairly attainable for folks who want to watch the film on their own, and then they can join this virtual discussion. So first thing this did was cut out the cost of the film license, which, as I mentioned, is a $300 to $500 saving per month. In those months that we did multiple films, of course, it's a larger saving. So any little bit helps right now for sure. Every session is moderated by one of our educators. So on the left here, you see Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson, who is our Chief of Education. But for most of these film discussions, we're also inviting in a guest co-moderator outside of our organization. So for this one, this was our discussion about milk in June. We associated it with Pride Month. And on the right is Sam Tornabene, who's a great friend of the museum. He was the former chair of Equality Texas, very involved with the Human Rights Campaign, and teaches the history of LGBTQ civil rights in various formats. He speaks at our teacher conference every year as well. So he was a great fit for this. He and Sarah were able to have a conversation, not just about the history that's discussed in the film, but also about some of the context before and after the assassination of Harvey Milk. Some other examples of who we've been able to feature. So this is a screenshot from our discussion about Hotel Mumbai in August. On the right, we have the co-writer of that film, John Colley. On the left is, again, Charlotte DeCoster, who's our Director of Education. Just a couple weeks ago, we had a discussion on Inglourious Bastards, very interesting film with a guy named Bart Weiss, who's an artistic director of a local film festival in town that we've worked with before. Coming up in October, we are covering First They Killed My Father, which is a film based on a book by Luong Ung, who's a Cambodian genocide survivor. So these are just an example of some of the co-moderators we're inviting. So this program really combines a few different strategies for us. So one is leveraging community partnerships. Bart Weiss, who I mentioned, who's the artistic director of the film festival, we had a relationship with him, same with Sam Tornabene. So they made a lot of sense to us when we had these films with these particular topics, just to reach out and say, hey, can you join us for an hour on this Monday and just have a conversation about this film. The second thing we did is look at past speakers. So in the case of Luong Ung, who's coming to join us next month, she actually spoke at the museum a couple of years ago about her experiences as a Cambodian genocide survivor. So we reached out to her and said, hey, we'd love to talk about your film that she helped make with Angelina Jolie. Would you want to come talk about it with us? The last thing we did was really just some blind outreach, like long shot. We had no idea if it was going to pan out. And that's the case with John Colley. So we knew we wanted to talk about Hotel Mumbai. We weren't sure who would be a good fit for a co-moderator for that. So the first thing we did is reach out to the director, sort of. That didn't really work out. I never heard from him. But then we just kind of Googled people who were associated with the film. So that's how we found John, and he has a website where he talks about himself and his work, and he has a contact form on there. So we just reached out, said what we were doing, asked if he might be available, and he jumped right on board, which is awesome. He's a lovely person. He's based in Australia, so actually we probably wouldn't have been able to bring him in person anyway. And the time difference worked out, which is always helpful. So yeah, we've used a couple different strategies here, but really to get these great, interesting conversations. I especially love the ones actually that have one of our educators, one of our historians, talking with a film expert or something like that, because that's a very interesting dynamic. The conversation we had on Inglourious Bastards was interesting because our chief of education does not like that film, but so it was a good back and forth on that one. Makes the conversation really interesting. So I say low cost for this one. A couple of these folks do ask for a small honorarium, but it's much, much less than they would if they were coming in person, having to travel. So that's been manageable for us. And some, again, especially our local community partners, are happy to jump on at no cost because we work with them often. It's more of a friendship at this point than just a partnership. One thing that works really well in this program, and I think one of the reasons we've been able to get so many yeses from these co-moderators, is that it's a little bit less of a heavy lift for them. So rather than them showing up and giving a 45-minute presentation on the film, let's say, we do a sort of a Q&A. So our staff asks some questions, they respond, the audience asks some questions, and they respond. So that I think is A, a little bit more fun for them, and B, means they don't have to prepare any kind of lecture or anything like that. So that's been helpful. And this series has been so fun for us and so successful that we definitely want to keep it even after we can go back to in-person programming. One thing we've talked about is just keeping this series, or possibly when we can sort of amp up our budget a little bit again, maybe showing a film in person, giving people a chance to come see it in our theater, but then still hosting this conversation virtually, maybe the day after, something like that. So that's been great to see, and people have been really requesting that we keep some of these things virtual as well, which has been interesting. But it's, you know, just easier when you can join at home from your pajamas instead of putting on an outfit and driving to downtown Dallas, is what we're finding out. So that is our last one, and I will send it back to Lauren.
Might help if I unmute myself. So the last program we're going to share is our Hoof It with a Historian historic walking tour at the Western Heritage Center. This is a program that has seen multiple successful seasons here at the center. It actually predates my time at this museum. Really popular. We have 10 different locations that each have their own theme. The tours are led by a staff member or a volunteer. So this is one of the areas that we have really leveraged a volunteer corps that we have. Those volunteers go through training and they speak on something that they tend to be really knowledgeable about. We're not just handing something over and saying, hey, do you do this? We're encouraging them to help develop their own tours. You can see from these photographs that they attracted large audiences moving around downtown. This program was really kind of little to no cost. And when I say that, an entire season's cost for materials and planning for this was 20 bucks to do our historic walking tours. And most of that is just printing costs, because we print out historic photographs that we can use as visual aids during the walking tours themselves. Each tour takes about 8 hours of prep time with the staff. And each staff member does the tour that they're most interested and passionate in, which means that gives us a lot of flexibility in making sure that we're able to be interested in what we're talking about. And when I say staff, I mean all three of us. Our executive director has a tour that he loves, and we just let him, we don't let him, but that's the tour he does. Our collections manager, who is an introvert, but she has a topic and photographs that she's discovered in our collection, and she put together her walking tour, and that's her tour. So this is an organizational-wide buy-in program. When everything changed in March, we had to think very critically about our Hoof It with a Historian program. Can you change the slide, please? And we talked about going virtual, and we realized that it just didn't work for us. It wasn't going to fit the budget requirements that we had. We even talked about like recording it or doing a live Zoom walk, and guess what? That takes up a whole lot of phone data. And that's not something we were able to do. So we chose to keep an in-person outdoor walking tour program. That said, I do recognize that we are in Montana, and Montana has a little bit different experience with COVID than some other states. We were not in quarantine as long. Some of our restrictions were not as harsh. But we worked very diligently according to the CDC, the WHO, and of course our local health board to make sure that the stipulations that we made and the changes that we made were still safe. So we limited our tours this summer to 7 people, and we required people to call ahead. They did not have to pay for their ticket ahead of time. This is a ticketed event, but they just had to put their name on the list. We did have a couple tours where we didn't have anybody sign up for one reason or another, and that helped us actually in knowing that that time didn't work, or you know what, maybe we don't have enough people interested in this at this time period. We did require people to wear masks. We did strongly encourage them to maintain physical distancing. And then we actually went and found a community partner to underwrite a speaker system. We used, I can show it to you when we're finished. It's just a speaker that goes around your waist. You can see me wearing it here. You can actually see that I have my mask, but it's not on because the microphone didn't pick up through the mask. It was a small challenge for us. But because we were outside and because... Again,
There's that train.
The train.
You're good.
It didn't come all morning, and then it waited until it was my turn.
We can all identify with this, so take a moment.
One of our historic walking tours is called "The Railroad Built Our Town." So you can see how viable and relevant that is to the community of Billings. But anyway, because we were outside and because I was able to maintain physical distancing, and I always got permission from the tour group about removing my mask long enough to present through the speaker, we have actually seen a lot of success with this model. I mentioned that we had a few tours that we didn't have anybody sign up for. That's incredibly in the minority. Probably 90% of our tours filled up. All 7 spaces were taken, to the point that oftentimes we offer spaces to volunteers for free if they want to tag along. We weren't able to do that this summer because there just simply wasn't room. So as long as you're able to be flexible and to think maybe a little bit beyond what you're used to, most of our programs can be adapted to fit within our current environment. Annie, can you advance slides for me? So we just want to take the opportunity to share some general tips and tricks for you. We just talked about 4 programs that we really love, we feel really proud of and really strong, but we also understand that that might not work for you. These tips apply to everybody. So for example, just simply checking your supplies. What do you already have in your building? As educators, I think most of us have inherited from like 10 years ago when somebody actually had money and they bought colored paper in bulk, and you still have that random ream of yellow paper that you don't know what to do with. That can go on your list. That can be a supply that you have that you don't have to spend any money on. You know, do you have inherited craft materials? What do you already have? And check your supplies and check your accessibility in regards to staff or volunteers. I mentioned that we share tour duties with some of our volunteers. We actually have a tour called Graveside Stories. It's a walk through our local cemetery that just highlights some of the historic people who are buried there. The tour guide for that tour is the retired cemetery superintendent. He was the cemetery superintendent for 30 years. That man has forgotten more about that space than I will ever learn on my own. He volunteers with us, and that's his tour, which means that the people who are taking that tour are getting an amazing experience, and we didn't have anything in that. You know, share your resources. Who can you partner with to spread the wealth? How can you create a program that's mutually beneficial? Who are your community partners? Who else in your community would benefit or could share the duties? You know, is there a church? Is there an Elks Club? Are there homeschool groups? Is there a local college or university that you can partner with the professor? If you partner with an organization, will one of you provide the programming and the other one provide the marketing? How can you split those duties up? And then, you know, really evaluate your space. If you have a successful program or you're thinking about a program, does it have to be held in person? Does it have to be held the way it's always been done? Can you take it to a park? Can you take it outside the building? Can you create an asynchronous experience? Does your program have to happen for all of your participants at the same time? Or can you provide it or split it up in such a way that they can take it home and have the flexibility to do it on their own? You know, does it always have to happen the way you think? And sometimes that's digitally, and sometimes it's not. So just to think a little creatively about what you're doing, and to have conversations with other people to bring in their ideas too.
Yeah, I will also add, so I'll cover these last three, you know, think about the resources you have internally. Lauren mentioned, do you have staff that you can work with? Obviously our numbers vary greatly, but is there a staff member who can help you who maybe doesn't normally work on your programming? This might be the time to get real creative and do a very much an all hands on deck kind of situation. Like I said, we've gotten staff members involved in leading discussions who don't normally do it, but it's also something they really enjoy. It's something that kind of changes up their routine. Other ways you can think about it, you know, do you have someone who, on your staff, in your development department or otherwise, who has an idea for a targeted grant ask to help fund it, or knows a donor who would really love this particular program? One thing for us that we know we have a set of donors who love anything that helps students. So those are the folks we go to when we develop a program and we need a little extra help. Do you have a marketing person who has some networks they can reach out to on social media to help find some partners, things like that? And even looking at we have a facilities manager who, wasn't something I talked about today, but we developed a virtual field trip program that's literally an iPad on a kind of a rolling stand that follows an educator around the exhibit. And our facilities manager was able to create a stand for us that we would have had to pay for otherwise. Be flexible. Can you create a version of an existing or a previous program with a lower price tag? For us, this definitely applies to our film program and then into our Movie Mondays program. But also, this might mean adjusting your expectations a little bit. I know that one of the answers we saw at the poll at the beginning was expectations about audience size. Maybe think about, you know, trying to manage expectations with your leadership or whoever that might be coming from, that, you know, we're still reaching people. One thing you could think of is doing sort of lower effort, or lower effort programs on the staff side, but maybe you can do a couple more of those than you could do one big program that reaches a lot of people. Another thing that we do is whenever our speakers will allow it, we record our programs through Zoom and then post it on our YouTube page after. So really we're reaching more people than just come to that one live session. And then work your connections. Who can help make that program come to life? So as I mentioned, this could be past speakers you've worked with, guest curators you've had, anyone that you can think of in that way. You can work the professional and personal networks of your colleagues, but also your volunteers. If you have a trusted pool of volunteers that you could go to and say, hey, we have this idea, or hey, do you all have any ideas of programming that you'd like to see that we could make happen? But also your board members. If you have an engaged board, or even just a couple board members that are really engaged, we've had this before where a board member has come up with, hey, have you guys thought about this person? I went to college with them. I could get you in touch, something like that. So just thinking about all the different networks that you have as well.
So I think with that, Annie, if you want to, you can advance. This is our contact information. Use it. I mean, we love what we do, and we want to make sure that you're as successful as you can be. So I think we can open the floor if we have any questions. I saw Anna, a couple popped up.
Yes, there's a number of questions from the chat. So I will go into those now. Annie, for your program, I read in the Movie Mondays, how did you invite people to send those virtual? Did they have
I don't know about you guys, I couldn't hear that.
Oh, sorry. Annie, did you have participants pre-register for the iRead program, and how did you encourage people to register?
Yeah, so we actually, any program that we do through Zoom, we require pre-registration for a couple reasons. One, we like to track attendance, so if we capture information, but two, because it's on Zoom, we have to send people the link somehow. So we don't post any of our Zoom links publicly just for safety reasons. I think we've all seen this examples of Zoom bombing that have happened, but especially as a Holocaust museum, we have to be really careful about that. So we have people pre-register, and then we send them an email. We have an automated system that sends them an email an hour before the program start with that link, just to really try to enhance security. So I would say our audience is fairly used to this. Even for our in-person programs, we ask people to register. It's not absolutely required, but just anywhere we promote the program, we just include a link to the registration page. And often it's a click here for more information and to register. So they kind of have to get to that registration page to see the full description anyway.
Great. What do you cover with your special guest ahead of time about technology, format, and connectivity before hosting a virtual program?
Yeah, so we do what we call a tech check for everyone that we bring in that's going to speak on Zoom. It doesn't matter if they've used it every day or they've never used it. So usually a week or two before the program, we ask them to do a tech check. We ask them to do it from wherever they plan to speak from the day of the program. So that way we can test their Wi-Fi, we can make sure the computer they're using, the sound and the video work. So it usually takes about 10 minutes. It's really just to see that they know how to get on, they know how to mute, unmute, turn their video on and off, and then it gives us a chance just to go over the format of the program as well, so they know exactly what to expect. We always send that via email, but it just kind of helps to talk through it in case they think of something and have questions. So yes, highly recommend a tech check. That way there are no surprises night of.
Great.
Unlike the train. Unlike my train that I can't control. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, but see, if you had that train, I'd be like, Lauren, is there somewhere else you could broadcast from? Like that.
Lauren, there were a few questions specifically about the speaker system that you use for HoofIt.
Yes.
And then, yeah.
It's here in my office right behind me. So we use an Amplivox system. It is simply, now that I've got it tangled up, it's simply a speaker on a waistband. It has one button. You turn it on, you increase the volume, and then you turn it off. And that's all it is. We bought ours for less than $200 a piece. And as I said, we found a community sponsor to underwrite it. So the cost to us was zero. In fact, we actually made money on it because of the donation that covered that. I will put this in the chat so that you all can see exactly what I have.
Great. Annie, I know you covered honoraria with the movie discussion, but we had a question about it related to the authors. Did they attend just for publicity of their books, or did you have to pay some of them their normal honoraria?
Yeah, so in those two cases with Martha Hall Kelly and Jane Yolen, we did not have to pay an honorarium for either of them. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think they had reached a point where they were pretty bored in quarantine. They were looking for something to do. So I think it's something they just wanted to do to be helpful to us. Like I said, Martha, we had a relationship with already, and they're both just lovely humans. And actually, I don't think, Martha did briefly promote. So one thing I'd say is that if you want to invite an author who has something coming out soon, make sure you give them the platform to promote that in the discussion. So Martha, at the end of the discussion, our last question for her was about her upcoming project. It's actually a follow-up on Lilac Girls, the book we were discussing. It's not done yet, but it just gave her a chance to do a plug. Jane Yolen, I don't think had anything coming out at the time. She just did it out of the goodness of her heart. But absolutely, if you want to put that in the ask in the first place, just say, hey, you know, I know you have a new project coming out. We would love to give you some time at the end to talk about that, especially just to kind of help promote it. Or if they have something available now, a new project that's available now, that's always a good thing to offer.
Great. Those were all the questions from the chat for right now. Are there any other questions?
Yeah. Or even I see in the chat that people have some really great suggestions too. I see some options if you want to do a virtual walking tour. I mean, MPMA is an amazing network, and we get together to share examples and to share ideas. So if anybody has anything else they'd like to share, Annie and I will take notes, because that's how we are.
Also, I just want to say I love Donna's comment about the virtual program someone joined from the side of the road in a VW bus. We've seen that before.
An astronaut.
Yeah, we haven't had any of our folks do that yet, which is why we try to do the tech check. But yeah, we had someone join. I was watching a program that was just in their car driving. I was like, I don't think that's very safe, but whatever you want to do, I guess.
We are trying a horror movie discussion, so it was
Ooh.
great to hear from you, Annie, about one that is the working for you. So 1950s horror movies, if anyone's
Very
interested.
Cool. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And that's a great, if you have a local film festival or even a non-local film festival, I bet there's some horror specific ones. I bet their artists would, or artistic directors would be interested in that.
Annie, would it be possible for any of our audience members to join in your virtual programming to observe if they're interested?
Absolutely. Here, let me drop our, I'm going to drop our website in the chat that takes you to our programs and events. So yeah, please feel free to register for anything. Everything we're doing is free right now. So no cost associated, but we would love to have you. We've got some great stuff coming up. And actually, you know what I'll do? I will also, I'm going to drop our YouTube channel in there. The ironic thing is that actually we don't have a lot of our book clubs in here or Movie Mondays because they're discussion based. So we end up with participant video feeds in the recording. So then we can't post it. But that gives you an idea of some of the other things we're doing as well. I saw a question from Elizabeth too about what level of attendance do you consider a success? It's tough right now. I mean, we have different kinds of virtual programs that we're doing that bring different attendance numbers. The discussion-based ones, actually by design, we like to keep a little lower so it feels more conversational. People can jump in if they want. But honestly, one shift that I've tried to make, not just for myself, which is difficult enough, but for our entire staff, is to really not necessarily judge success by attendance. It's more about, are we delivering good content? If it's discussion-based, are we getting good discussion? Are we getting good audience engagement? And then we do post-event surveys as well. So each week we send out a survey for the programs that we did that week, and just to hear what people's feedback is. And it also gives them a place to actually give us suggestions too, so more programs that they want to see. So I'm trying to pivot a little bit. It is hard to not measure success by attendance, but that's the goal.
To answer that question from our perspective, I mean, obviously with our HOPA tours, 7 people is not a lot of people. It's not, but that's what we're comfortable with. Internally, we kind of joked around that we would do a tour for 2 people, and that if we can get 2 people interested. And part of our challenge is that a lot of our really pre-COVID engaged audience falls solidly in the at-risk community, and they're not comfortable leaving their house. Some of them for whatever reason. I mean, we are in Montana, and rural internet bandwidth is a challenge occasionally. So virtual isn't always an option for us too. We really kind of pulled our measure of success away from attendance as well and went to community engagement. How the audience that we had, how engaged were they? And part of that meant that we had to be willing to take some risks, and we had to be willing to fail. And we made the decision that, you know, we'll try something twice. And if it fails the second time, we're not going to do it again, and we'll figure out what works best for our audience.
Yeah, here. I've had several heart-to-hearts with our CEO. She and I have very similar personalities, so we're a little bit perfectionist, but we've had some heart-to-hearts about it's good to try things and see what works and what doesn't, and people will tell you. I mean, that's the best part. If you give them an avenue to tell you what they like and what they don't like, they will definitely tell you.
We had another question in the chat about what registration platform you're using, Annie, and also a request, Lauren, for you to drop the link to your virtual exhibit.
So we are currently using, we have sort of an all-in-one system called Patron Manager. It's built on Salesforce, but it does our general admission ticketing, our program ticketing. It's also a membership and a donor database. So it's a whole thing. But before that, we were using Eventbrite, which is great. Eventbrite is super simple, super easy. Highly recommend if you're just looking for an online registration system. And if your event is free, then it's free to use. If you have paid tickets, I think they take a certain percentage plus like a small credit card processing fee, but it's not enormous. And they're timely in paying it out too, if it is a paid event. So yeah, highly recommend Eventbrite. Patron Manager is what it's called. Yeah, I'll put that in the chat. I will say it's like a totally all-in-one system. So I would only recommend that if you're really looking to overhaul your entire situation.
I'm pulling up the website, I promise. Give me a second, guys. We'll get there. Are there any other questions or comments, rebuttals, interpretive dance opportunities, song requests?
I'll go ahead and say something. We try and do partnerships as much as possible, simply because we're a county museum in the great state of Wyoming that is totally reliant on oil and gas, and they just soapbox for a second, they keep kicking the can down the road about money. So like the cheaper, the better. But we've had really good success about kind of if we have to incur like a startup cost for our programs. We've had really good success with like our local banks, our local foundations, just kind of get an idea of what your local state foundations kind of require grant-wise. And, you know, if you can partner with like a humanities council or something. I'm a big fan of interdisciplinary programs, just my background. So, you know, taking this program segment and tweaking it so it reflects more of the museum. And I think so long as your programs are mission-based, the world's your oyster, or whatever the saying is.
Thanks, Jen.
I just want to give a shout out to the Dallas Holocaust Museum. When we were starting to look at what we were doing for our kids programs, I actually joined in one of your story times with your educator, which was very early on, and kind of experienced what that looks like. And it helped inform our programming, where we do a virtual story time followed by virtual art making, or by art making. And we actually provide the kits every month for them to create very simple art with us over Zoom. And to Lauren's comment about using what you have, you would never believe how many things we can do with a paper plate. I don't know why. We have a ton of paper plates. But we added a new component to it, right? That I just wanted to kind of share with everyone, because we are doing it live, like you guys were doing your story times, and actually allowing the kids to provide feedback and be unmuted. We started doing show and tell. And so the kid, become, through evaluations, we've learned that's become their favorite part, is to actually have the opportunity to engage with each other. So we do it every Thursday. We have about the same group of kids, somewhere around 30. And they're actually starting to talk to each other over the Zoom platform. So it's really exciting to see that community kind of developing, and that kind of stemmed from you guys. So thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're glad to hear. Yeah, the story time, and that was totally new territory for us because we're a Holocaust museum. So we don't do a lot with little ones, but the virtual space, since they don't actually have to come into our space, which has some graphic materials, things like that, gave us a chance to do that. It gave us a chance to do our virtual summer camp. So it's been fun exploring. We have one educator in particular who loves crafts and putting all that together. So we've just let her run with it because she loves it.
There is a good suggestion in the chat from someone that shops at Goodwill for a lot of their craft supplies. So just in case you're not following along in the chat, and Donna suggested Habitat for Humanity.
I also reach out to senior centers, even though they're not meeting in person right now, they still have their networks, and those, not meaning any disrespect at all, but those little old ladies have so many craft supplies that they have gathered over a lifetime of amazingness. And when they have somebody else who wants to use what they have, they will give you boxes of ribbon and fabric and hot glue gun sticks and crayons and whatever you could ever want. So even just reaching out to and kind of creating a partnership that way too, just supplies, can be a little surprising.
You touched on it. I would add though, if you're asking for fabric from little old ladies, be prepared. for the amount of fabric you're going to get.
Yes. And
it's a lot.
And it helps to be specific.
Yes.
You know, when we put together the art studio space in our Billings thrift store exhibit, which by the way is one of my favorite exhibits we've ever put together. It was phenomenal. But we lost a board member over it because she did not agree that thrift art was art. Whole different story. We can do I'll talk about that later. But I reached out to some of our elderly community members for craft supplies, and I was specific. We are looking for pipe cleaners. We are looking for buttons. We are looking for old jewelry. We are looking for this and that. And they came through, and we just put it on a table and allowed our visitors in our community to create their own masterpiece. And some of the work that we got was like, we didn't even throw it away when the exhibit was over. Like, staff claimed it, and it's still sitting in my office. It's like really cool stuff. So we are hitting the end of our time together. So if there's any other questions, now's your chance. Although I really hope that you got our contact information. If not, maybe Annie, maybe we can drop that in the chat real quick. Just an email address so that they have it. And for myself, I don't want to speak for Annie. Oh my gosh, I can't spell and type at the same time. Please use my contact. If you have a question,
absolutely.
Reach out to us. That's kind of what we're here for. Cool. Well, on time. We are so good.
Nailed it.
Ding, 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 ding.
You guys are super. Thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're gonna drop the link.
Can I do a self-promotion real quick?
Grab that book. I want to see it close.
Yeah, so I was actually asked to do this session because I put out I published a book called 101 Museum Programs Under $100. I will admit that it was published pre-COVID, but most of the programs that you'll see in here can be adapted, both digitally and continued in person. But that's just a shameless self-promotion. Don't judge me because I did that. But it's a really, really fantastic resource, and it sits on my bookshelf, not because I like to show it to people, but because I use it. And it came as a result of MPMA's network and just reaching out to other people in the field and in the region who do amazing work for no money. Not only for no money to make the program, but because we don't get paid much. So a double-edged sword there.
Well,
Good.
It features programs from across the region. So there's
from across the country
members that have programs featured in that. So great resource. Thank you, Lauren.
Absolutely.
You guys are super. I'm gonna drop this link to the main room, and we're gonna hang out there with Susan.
And if anybody has any specific questions, I can hang out for a few minutes too. If anybody wants to stay behind with a question or two.
We'll leave the room open for a few.
I appreciate it.
Susan and John are ready to see you back in the main room.
Lauren, what's the title again?
101 museums, programs. Look, now I can't even say my
under $100, right?
$100. 101 museum programs under $100. Proven programs that work on a shoestring budget.
Thank you.
There we go.
I really struggled, Lauren, every time you said Annie. I was like, oh, no, that's not me.
It's a good thing I don't go by my real name, which is Anna. That would be very confusing.
My cousin used to call me Annie, so I think that's part of my problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
We appreciate you guys.
Hey, Lauren, Annie, I just want to tell you thank you so much for doing this session and pulling it together and making it, you know, a really great offering for us on our education day. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I had fun with it.